I'm Michael Goldman. Welcome to another installment of Studio Daily's podcasts from the Frontline series, where each month we talk with filmmakers from various disciplines about their work on current major feature films. And this month, our guest is visual effects supervisor Bill Westenhofer, discussing the landmark digital work done for Ang Lee's new film Gemini Man, a project in which filmmakers created a photoreal digital human character representing a younger version of actor Will Smith and made that character the film's co star with extensive up close screen time. The movie tells the story of an aging government assassin played by Smith who's being hunted by his identical clone, the actor's digital doppelganger, so to speak. The techniques and philosophies behind the work have raised the VFX bar in Hollywood significantly, and Westenhofer was excited to discuss how it was done and what the implications might be. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Bill, thanks for chatting with us
My
today.
pleasure.
And I thought, to get going on this very unique film, you give us a little bit of background to start on sort of the how, the why, the when. You got involved with this project, which, as I understood it, had been circulating around Hollywood a long time. I know you'd participated in award-winning work with Ang Lee before with Life of Pi. Was that the connection that brought you to this?
Absolutely. In fact, the way this started was a phone call with Ang in August of 2017 where he said, I want to do for humans what you did with the tiger on Life of Pi. So, for visual effects, since I started 25 years ago, making a convincing digital person has been something we've talked about as a cool thing to achieve. And it's been that long. We are more than anything else. We are, as social beings, we've evolved for a million years to be experts at the face, and every one of us, if you're whatever your age is, you've had that many years of expertise in a face that's, if you're just a tiny bit off, there's something in our wiring that says this is, human that's got something, they're lying to you or you're having a stroke or something, and that's where the term uncanny valley comes from, actually. Mm-hmm. You go from a caricature, which we readily accept, to, as you get more and more real, if you're not all the way there, there's something in our brains that automatically say this is something bad to be avoided. That being said, when you sit down with an Ang Lee, who also has at the same time an agenda to not film this like every other movie and to do the high frame rate and the 4K and all that kind of stuff. What was the initial debate, discussion, mission statement when he's basically asking you to do some stuff that the industry up until now has not fully and completely solved? It's not like you're taking existing techniques and just doing them in a new movie. Well, first of all, what's, like you said, this is the second project I've had with Ang, and what's fun with Ang is that he is courageous, adventurous, and it's always going to be an interesting ride. He likes to try to do something that hasn't been done before. With this one, there's two fronts. There's the digital human, and that's with Gemini Man. We obviously have Will Smith together in the frame with his younger self, and it's part of the rub. It's the fact that it is his clone, so we want it to be him, not just an actor looking like him. It wants to be young Will Smith. That was the goal, and because they were both in the frame at the same time, it kind of discounted the traditional de-aging method of filming him in makeup and doing a post-process on top to smooth out wrinkles and make him look younger. We really needed to go digital. But also, Ang has since his previous effort with Lynn, is interested in high frame rate. And that started when he did Life of Pi and shot the movie in 3D, the sense of being in that space. It's no longer an image you're looking at on the wall. You feel like you're actually in there with Pi in the boat. But with the flicker and with those other things, it kind of held him back a little bit from feeling the immersion that would give. So since that time, he's pursued high frame rate, which is the idea. By shooting at 120 frames a second, it starts to eliminate excessive motion blur and flicker, and it looks more like human vision. That in his mind to increase the immersion that enhances that effect. And then back to the digital human with high frame rate and with 4K, details that you wouldn't expect, like concealing makeup on an actor, becomes evident. So we couldn't just rely on trying to bury what the minimal wrinkles that Will has as a very healthy 50-year-old man. The makeup technique didn't go. So to make a digital human that had youthful skin, by going that route and upping the fidelity with Weta and their team, we could show young Will Smith as he really is meant to be.
Well, that's kind of what I was driving at, because if I understood right, with Ang Lee having the high frame rate approach and style being so important to him, I was presuming that made the already extremely difficult job that he was asking you to do even more difficult. And I think there's some confusion rolling around the industry about what is or is not de-aging, since we have other projects going on, like Martin Scorsese's project, where they're doing some unique things with famous actors. So when you sat down with him, did you readily have a plan in mind, or was it like, let's go talk to the boys in the lab?
I knew, as a visual effects supervisor, you have to have your finger on the pulse and know where everything is at. And we did survey the state of the art in 2017. We discussed the two options. And when we say de-aging, the distinction is really germane within our industry. To the layman, to de-age is to represent someone as their younger self. So ideally, in our goal, we're trying to work ourselves at a recognition, so the audience shouldn't really care the technique. We're explaining it just because it's for within our industry, it's a bit of a significant technological step. We did look at the state of the art, and there had been a lot of attempts that came close. Rogue One, Blade Runner, Paul Walker, and Fast 7. They'd all presented a fully digital human that were pretty close, and we felt that with the same determination that we applied to the Tiger, and just a drive, and with the team of Weta, who coincidentally had done not just Paul Walker but the Planet of the Apes, which, while again not human, were definitely the most realistic looking creature that I'd ever seen. So I thought with that combination of ingredients and a full appreciation of how hard it was going to be, and making sure we set enough time to make mistakes and to get as much reference, that we could push it over the line.
As I understood it, there's approximately, I read somewhere, like 900 visual effects shots in this movie, which I guess is not as huge a number as like a superhero movie or something
Except
that
in this, when Ang approaches 3D, and one of the things that to me makes a difference between a successful 3D movie and not is the director really has to have 3D in mind when they film. An audience doesn't like a lot of cuts in a movie. When you're looking at 3D, it takes time to adjust every time you change the camera angle. So Ang tends to have these really long shots, which means even more work for visual effects. So yes, they're 900 shots, but they're 900 really long shots. Right. And then at 120 frames a second, there's the very first real solid look we get of Junior is in a bedroom scene. That's a sustained 2-minute long shot. And I believe the end result was about 15,000 frames. Weta did the entire opening sequence to Guardians of the Galaxy 2, which is that sustained shot of Groot. And this one shot had more frames than that entire opening sequence did, at 120 frames.
Yeah, and as you say, long shots and close-ups.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially the digital character is the co-star of the film. Junior's is the name of the younger Will Smith character. So, as you're sort of getting together with Weta Digital, maybe you can address, who down there was the team leader and who you worked with, and sort of the R&D work that kind of precipitated this whole...
Guy Williams was their visual effects supervisor. Outstanding. He had worked with a lot of the behind-the-scenes work on digital humans, and actually worked on the Guardians of the Galaxy scene, so he could be a definite authority on how many frames it took. Paul Story was their animation director. The two of them, and then one of the advantages of the timing of this shot is that we were able to do two things. We took advantage of some R&D that they had started for their digital humans in pursuit of perhaps other films that may have a blue humanoid character that's going to show up. So we did take advantage of some of the R&D of Avatar, and then the perfect timing is that this allowed them to take advantage of the stuff there, and then we developed the stuff that we did for this film is definitely flowing straight into Avatar on the back end as well. Mm-hmm. So it was a good time for Weta with what they were doing with their R&D, and to push digital humans for the continuum of projects in their disposal.
And has that been over the years, in your experience, a common theme where different projects are influencing each other, both when they're in the same facility and even when they're not?
Yeah.
For that matter.
I've worked with ILM a lot. I thought one of the things that I thought ILM did a great job of over the years is when they're working on a project, they may find a shot or two in the background where they could track test a new technology that, if it works, it can, generate new business and new possibilities. They do it on a handful of shots in the background. So if it failed, they have a workaround to patch it up. And the same thing when I worked at Rhythm and Hughes, we did seek, during a project, it's always great to take some new idea and really try it out, because we get really excited. Like I sometimes like to joke and say, I envision my job as coming to a cliff with the tablecloth and some rope, jumping off and hoping to make the parachute on the way down. But that's just a metaphor for the fact that we love trying new things. And it's what's exciting, about this project. If it doesn't scare you a little bit, it's not really fun. That's the fun. That's the excitement. We love making movies. We love being artists and participating, and we love pushing the technology to see what new things we can do.
And getting back for a second to the stereo aspect, the 3D aspect, am I correct? Ang Lee's not a fan of this post apply stereography to
right.
He wants to make the movie
native stereo.
What was the technology and the approach for that?
Well, that's it requires a hefty camera rig. We had an 80-pound rig, which was actually as light as possible. Ben Gervais, our technology expert, worked with Aries to create a specialized version of their camera that could be mounted on a rig to get make it as light as possible. Mm-hmm. But it's two cameras with a beam splitter, so that they're actually filming. The reason you see stereo is that your eyes are slightly apart from one another. So if your eyes see two different images that are just slightly different objects, the relationship between each other are just slightly different in each eye, and that's what our brain then fuses to say, oh, this thing's closer to us than that. So to film stereo, you actually put two cameras together, and then they're filming the scene at the same time, which sounds great, but the problem from a visual effects side is that for you to make comfortable 3D, you then have to process those images so that there is, if there's any warping of the frame or the cameras bounce and those things kind of shift from their relationship during the course of the shot, it creates this headache and an uneasiness, and we got to make sure we smooth all that out. It requires, to do native 3D, you need to track objects in the frame perfectly. It's really clear that something's not sitting at the right depth if you do it wrong. A lot of traditional techniques of, thing called rotoscoping, where you kind of cut a mat out so you can put something behind something else. That mat has to be exactly right in both eyes, or else the object looks like it's at the wrong depth. So there's just a lot of, in addition to the amount of information, at 120 frames, 4K, native stereo, our work on a traditional movie that's 1/24 of a second, 2K, we have 40 times the amount of data just to represent that same slice of time. So that plus the additional work to make stereo look perfect, it actually did increase our workload tremendously. But the end result, when you shoot native stereo, there are subtleties, even hairs and leaves on the trees and all these things that are now perfectly spaced apart, that no matter what you do in a post-construction work is only going to be an approximation, and you're never going to get quite the richness of fidelity. And at 4K and at this native format, it's amazing, especially Vista shots. You can still see depth on tiny details in the background of the shots of Budapest that you'd never get out of a reconstruction process.
And because all this was necessary, as you're describing, maybe you could address what your collaboration was like with the camera team led by a very accomplished cinematographer, Dion Beebe. Right. And has, because we're making movies like this, has that changed? Visual effects and camera, it's not like one's a production activity right. and one's a post activity anymore.
No, in fact, that's Dion was phenomenal in this, and he really embraced the challenges and the new technology. But I think, to your point, with visual effects, and that's not just with camera. I think with every department now, there's been a blurring of the lines between visual effects and production, the production design, visual effects and costumes, visual effects. It's kind of funny that on these large visual effects movies, I'll be sometimes the next hire after the director, because our department works with every single other department in the movie to the degree that only the director and other people do, because we do interface with just about every decision. So particularly with camera on this, we did help out, to shoot 120 frames has issues with the amount of light that you have at your disposal. So we would help him if he needed to put lights on set somewhere to light a subject. We'd take care of the paint outs and coordinate back and forth with that. It's also, there was another fun thing on this project with night shots, and that involved visual effects and camera. In that, because of the concept that this is representing human vision, Ang really wanted to portray night in a way that you haven't seen on film before. In that, anyone who's taken photography and has gone outside at dusk or late evening, with your eyes you can see a lot of information. Then you take a picture, and all that's left are a couple of dots where there was a headlight or something else, but everything else is black. So we really wanted to show night the way you see night. So to do that, we shot day for night, which is sometimes you can think back to westerns where they shot in the day and they just put a filter up. But instead, we took a daytime shot, processed down the colors so that it felt more appropriate for a full moon look, and then added in practical lights that weren't possible to see with in the daytime, and just made a nighttime look on scenes with the dock, and seeing that is truer to what happens if you were to go outside with just a little bit of light, but you really can't see what's going on.
Well, as we, speaking of, the extra work involved in the length and detail and effort of the shoot, maybe you could give folks kind of the basic outline of the methodology for shooting this movie, so that we got a junior, and we got Will Smith's character, the older Will Smith's character, Henry. If I understood right, it basically boils down to shooting everything twice. Kind of.
It's not really shooting, because it's important that what you see for Junior is a completely digital construct. Right. There's no photography involved. What we did to do a scene, I'll do the hardest ones. For a scene with Henry in frame with Junior, Henry being the 51-year-old Will. So we had Will Smith dressed up as Henry, and he acted next to an acting double. In this case, the gentleman's name is Victor Hugo. No relation to
that
the
was
author.
His actual name.
That's his actual name. He's a 23-year-old actor from the UK who had the same build, skin texture, etc. So he looked Will Smith enough that we could use him as a reference later when we did our digital creation. But Will would act with him, get the scene, and we wanted to give everything to Will so that when he did his performances for both sides, it was as natural as possible. So at least he had someone to act to instead of a tennis ball. Then, at the end after we filmed the whole movie, we go back on a motion capture stage, which is basically an empty stage with a ton of cameras around, and we've measured out the geography of the set that he was on, put in props that, if necessary, that he's going to interact with. Then we swap the roles. We have Will Smith now wearing a motion capture suit. It's a gray suit with a lot of dots on, and this head camera that's on his face to capture his facial movement. And we brought in Victor again to stand in where Henry was, just again so he could act against someone. And then we also had on TV monitors, at that point we had a rough cut of the sequence, and we'd play back Henry giving his lines as Henry so that Will could actually kind of have a conversation with himself. Mm-hmm. And then we record all the motion and data of his full body, because again, it wasn't enough just to take his head and plop it on Victor's body. Your acting performance starts from the ground up. What you do with your head is reflected in your body gestures and things like that. So we capture his motion, that's put into the computer, and then we actually completely erase Victor and put back in our digital Junior. But there's no photography. It's a digital creation, much like Gollum or Planet of the Apes. We're not taking filmed components from Will as Junior and putting it in.
Well, it's interesting. I find it fascinating, actually, when you reference it like that. Making that distinction that it's not really photography because it's important that the Junior character be a digital character, and yet the acting is real.
Correct.
And so, if you, I guess it depends how you define photography. But if you think photography is capturing whatever elements you're kind of doing that, you're just not doing them.
And that's absolutely true. And to give Will, complete credit. The Junior that you see, the performance is 100% him. There was no magic button that we could say, just act like a 50-year-old and we'll push a button and we'll take care of it. He had to internalize being youthful and naive, and he and Ang did an exercise before we started shooting where he read the whole script as Fresh Prince. He read the whole script as his character from 6 Degrees of Separation. He actually read the whole script as his father, and that was important because his father was a military guy, Will's real father. And in the movie, Junior has been raised in a military household, so it's it is again, it's young Will Smith, but it is a different character. He's a bit more somber than what we've seen before. But all the nuances of youth were coming from Will's performance. We just then made it look physically like his young self.
So then, while you're shooting and making the movie from both points of view, am I correct that the Weta Digital, along before that, was building the digital Will Smith?
They started not long after. I started in August. They probably started on Junior in December. So to the degree there's any photography, that we did a huge session of getting data from Will at his current age, taking tons of different photography of 360-degree photographs, putting him down in a chair and capturing the shape of hundreds of different face poses. So we went through a whole facial calisthenics of every pose the face can make. We put him down in this it's called the light stage that has a lot of cameras and lights that fire at the predetermined sequence, so you can see exactly how the skin responds to light. We also brought in a skin double, so we don't have Will Smith as a 23-year-old self. We don't know all the data, so we try to get people who are close enough to get samples of youthful African American skin to again look and see the different the way light responds to that. And then once that's done, Weta then worked for about a year to create the asset that would start appearing in the shots. And in fact, even after we started working on the shots, they still continued to refine and update almost right up till the end, making adjustments till it was right. One of the things I thought what Weta did that I thought was fantastic to do, I said that we had looked at the state of the art and tried to figure out what things would improve. And the things that take us from a really good digital human to reality are getting to the point that it's subconscious. Mm-hmm. Even an artist has a hard time to point to it and say, that's it right there, just keep dialing up the sheen or something. And really what they did is they went to the science and started studying the nuances of skin to help you. What you want to achieve is the point where the computer is taking care of that detail for you. A DP, when he lines up and films somebody, doesn't know all the nuance of what the light's doing under the skin. You can set up lights, make someone look beautiful, put the camera, and nature does its thing. And to get that last reality, we need the computer to do the same thing for us. So Weta went to lengths of studying that there's 4 different types of melanin in the skin, and some are more visible at the edge of the face, and some are more visible straight on. They built teeth not just as a shape with a white material on it. They built the root, the enamel. They built eyes as a dark retina surrounded by a sclera and put the conjunctiva in. It's a lot of nerdy anatomical things, but that by doing a full simulation of what the light's doing, then you can start to become like a DP, where you put the lights in the right place and the result the computer spits out is what it's supposed to be.
Well, and I don't know if what you're describing there is the same thing or another accomplishment in addition to. I'd heard something or read something about Weta developing a new tool called Deep Shapes for facial expressions, and maybe you could contextualize what the hell that means.
it's and by the way, this was the name for Deep Shapes was created before the term deep fakes had become part of the lexicon. Unfortunate coalescence, but in this case, Deep Shapes is a way to simulate the fact that your skin is made up of muscles with a layer of fat and then skin on top of that. And there's, as things move, sometimes when you pull a muscle, it's deep in the face and that causes sort of a broad movement. Other times when it's close to the surface, it's just the skin that moves. So they have an ability to, with motion capture, what you're doing is tracking a bunch of dots to see what Will did. But then you have to put that back on Junior's model and have the face move correctly as a response. So this is another tool that the animators can use to dial in where the muscle is actually happening. And it also has, so it's doing that, and it's also doing a step where, like I said, that we built a whole library of face shapes. And in some ways, the process of animating is going from one face shape to another. But in that path, in reality, things like the skin doesn't, when it stops, it doesn't stop instantly. It actually kind of overshoots and comes back. And there's a little bit of a lag, like when the eyebrows connect and they stick together, there's a little bit of a quiver. And the Deep Shapes process, in addition to the level, kind of adds that kind of nuance to it as well. It's just all these things can really be best summarized as a symphony of details that you have to get right, because if there's any one that's wrong, you're going to look at it and you may not know what it is, but there's just something off in the face and it throws the illusion. So all of them have to work for it to be right.
Now, what was the role that pre-existing footage, and there's a lot of it, of Will Smith? He's a well-photographed human being from when he was younger, his Fresh Prince days, his Men in Black days. What was that strictly just reference material?
Yes, but very important reference material, because like I said, we didn't have a 23-year-old Will Smith. If we were to, in 20 years, if we were to go back and want to show a young actor today as themselves in 20 years, we collect a lot of stuff in the process of making movies that would help that endeavor. All these things I talked about, putting people in light stages, we kind of are doing that to a lot of folks for their digi-doubles and for all this stuff. 23 years ago, that wasn't being done. So the best we had, we did manage to find a life cast of Will from Independence Day as sort of a check to make sure we're going the right way. But otherwise, it's artists at Weta taking 51-year-old Will Smith and trying to shape him back to his old self. And all the movie photography was key on doing that. It wasn't a direct. You couldn't just feed it in the computer and it did that. We had to put frames side by side and keep making adjustments until it worked. So that was reference in building the model, and it was also key reference in, as we're working on the shots and where something's not quite working, we can go back to his old library to find something that where he did that kind of performance and make the corrections. In fact, that kind of came in an unexpected way. As I mentioned, Junior's a kind of a brooding character, and we're working on these shots, and we've got it looking like a real human. And we've put all the motion capture data, and we're looking at it and say, it just doesn't feel canonical Will. Like, what's going on? We went back and forth between the motion capture reference video we had and that, just to see where it was. Just couldn't find anything. And then I went through and started to realize that the Will Smith we know was a very sarcastic, bon vivant person, and his had raised eyebrows, big smiles all the time, and that wasn't what Junior was doing. So I went and found moments in Fresh Prince, moments in 6 Degrees of Separation where he was scowling, and I put that up next to ours and realized that we'd actually nailed it. We were perfect. We just aren't used to seeing Will act that way, which is kind of cool, because what you're doing then is you're showing what Will Smith would have done at his 23-year-old self if he was doing a brooding, dramatic character. So it's kind of cool.
Well, speaking of these subtle nuances and changes and evolutions in your face, I mean, I had read somewhere that your face changes as you grow old, not just in terms of developing wrinkles, but like the size and shape of and direction of nose, ears, things like that.
Like I said, to make 23-year-old Will Smith, we had the pictures, but they also Weta studied the science of aging, and Will is a very healthy 51-year-old guy. But even with him, they built they had his young self and his old self, and they could do a slider of a morph between the two, and something you really, even a 51-year-old guy, you don't really want to show him. Just it is gravity does its thing to everyone, and there's your jowl, your nose grows, your ears grow, and there's a little shrinking of the jowls. Fortunately for Will, it's minimal as can be for a 50-year-old, and that was another little challenge of ours, that when we first made Junior at 23 and we put him up next to Henry, it didn't look that different.
Right.
Obviously the facial hair. So we went and we went even farther. We found a 5-year-old version of Will, and then did a kind of a morph between 23-year-old and 5-year-old, and found somewhere right around 18 that kind of still looked old enough to be Junior, but then enough of a difference between Henry and him to get the point across for the movie.
And having, in your experience, having been around filmmakers, actors for so long, what was kind of the impression you got of how Will Smith dealt with this, and also like a Victor Hugo? I don't know what his credit would be on the movie. Yeah. He was an actor.
Yeah, he's we call him a acting lighting reference for the film. And Victor was great in that he knew right off the bat that his role is that, and he still poured his heart out and did everything he could for Will, which was great. And he really, I can definitely say that there's no way we could have done the movie without him. He was essential for Will to act with. He was essential reference for us, because it was the closest thing we had when the lighting wasn't quite looking right, of seeing what truth should be. And then Will Smith was also, we couldn't have done it without him. He's very generous. He allowed us to poke and prod him and take all sorts of embarrassing pictures for our reference to Bill Jr. And then, he's also done this before. He's not unfamiliar with motion capture and technology, so he can deal with the abstraction. We did try to make it as direct as possible in our steps, but you're on a stage, wearing a gray suit with a bunch of cameras, and you are talking to not yourself, and you have to be able to then forget all that and still be genuine. And Will was phenomenal. Not everyone can do that.
Yeah, because getting back to sort of the overarching theme of this thing, the whole uncanny valley thing you mentioned earlier, which I understood it meant that, as you were saying, that there's just something off that you can tell. And I was always told over the years that it was the eyes. It was the eyes. We can't get those right digitally. What was the methodology where that became less of a big deal?
It's funny, the eyes, I don't know. I think digital eyes have been, like, if you look at the Apes and Planet of the Apes, I thought the eyes were fantastic. It's more, I think it's a symphony of things. It's the eyes, but it's the mouth. Like the mouth is actually 10 times more complicated than the eyes. The way the lips come together, you want to feel the sense of that the lips are a softer material and that they compress and they stick together, and then the neck is also, so the neck, when we do motion capture, we tend to put dots just on the face, but in a performance, when you swallow, that says as much about your emotions as as anything else. So you need all the nuances of that to be right, or else there's a detachment. Some early attempts at motion capture felt wooden, and that some of that is, if you miss those details, there's something, you lose a degree of, especially in heavily emotive scenes, you lose that degree of fidelity. It is a concert of all those different things that have to be right. And ironically, I think the eyes were one of the easier parts for us in this one. It was the rest that has to all be right to work. Because
philosophically, having been through this experience, I'm wondering your philosophy on what the application will end up being. I'm sure somebody will come up with yet something else that's new and different. But are we heading to a place where we're going to have a new John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara movie because you're just going to bring them back from the dead and make them 30 years old?
That's a question for audiences to decide. And I think with any technology, forget just visual effects, any technology, period, society has to decide what the bounds are and what's ethically okay, what's acceptable. I think we're getting to the point where actors should certainly start discussing the rights to their image in a certain way, and the rights to their data, perhaps. I think I do believe Will Smith's image on frame is owned by him, and the rights to do that. But the data that was acquired is sitting on a hard drive somewhere, and the actors might want to start discussing that. Ang and I did have a discussion of what this means. The term wasn't really there in 2017 that we know of, but the deep fake of it all and what that means for their video going forward. That up to this point, there's full trust if you see a video of something that's truth. Now perhaps that's in question. I will say right now that the last 4 or 5% to make something look completely real is 10 times harder than the first 95. So maybe those percentages are a little off, but just visually, that last bit is incredibly hard to get right. And I don't think we had a team working for 600 people working for 2 years to try to do it. And even looking back, I think we really happy with our result. I still think there's room for improvement. And I think we're not at that point where someone is going to, in their garage, convincingly pull off that. The deepfake stuff that's out there is cool. To me, I still see the edges, and it's amazing how much harder it is to get rid of those edges than one might think. But it does. We at some point we do have to find ways to help verify video evidence as much as anything else. But I think our real goal as a visual effects team, what we want to do is remove barriers for filmmakers and creative people to tell their stories. So as far as what to do with this technology, it would allow audiences and the director want to see it, a historical figure to be represented as exactly like they used to be, not just an actor in makeup. You can discuss, do we bring some deceased actors back to the screen? if the appetite's there and everyone's good, that's a possibility.
It's kind of a whole new world. Because if I understood right with Gemini, man, I mean, the logic of the application was quite clear. If I read right, it had circulated a long time, and one of the big objections to making the film was to have a guy playing against a different actor trying to be that guy who's not that guy.
Right.
Nobody was too crazy about that idea.
Yeah, I mean, this particular story is a clone of yourself, and that's, for it to be another actor, you're always adding that additional abstraction that, if you can do it perfectly and make it look like his young self, it creates a different dynamic. That was the whole reason for the movie. We certainly can. You can shoot the movie with the young actor playing it. It's just a different thing, and that's not what the filmmakers wanted to portray.
Because even if Will Smith had an identical twin brother who was also an actor, he'd still be the wrong age.
Right.
So you would still have that issue.
Right. It wouldn't be a brother. If it's an identical twin, yeah, exactly. That's you're not 23 years old.
Now, was Weta Digital, before we wind up, were they the only vendor on this film? I mean,
No.
there are other visual
Yes,
effects in the movie.
there are other visual effects. So the company called UPP in Prague, they did the train sequence in the beginning, the shots of Gulfstream. They did a lot of our day for night work and set extensions. Scanline did, there's a sequence at the end where a minigun opens up on a hardware store. We did, along with the special effects team, did a lot of work. Ang wanted to spice that up. He just wanted it to be as spectacular as possible. So they added a lot of digital destruction at 120 frames. And if you simulate that many breaking wine bottles at 120 frames on the thing, that they spent a good 9 months on that one shot. And then we had an in-house team taking care of. I mean, in this movie at 120 frames, ironically, things like just removing tracking markers was actually quite an endeavor. So we had an in-house team taking care of a lot of that. And then other stereo companies did the stereo work. So this was shot to native stereo. I think 99.9% of the movie is that way. There were a handful of shots that we did what was called stereo reconstruction. So it wasn't really dimensionalization. It was, example, if you're filming the stuff in the bike chase, we actually had the camera mounted on the back of a bike and shot as much of it for real, but the vibrations caused the cameras to warp a little bit, and you couldn't just make them fit. So what they were able to do is take portions of the frame that worked and then just convert other sections that didn't, and then do a reconstruction that way, but not a full-blown, they still were able to keep as much of the photography as possible.
So it was quite a unique and interesting project. You've been, as we wind up here, you've been doing this for a while, and a few years ago, you guys won Academy Awards for just coming up with a digital tiger that could act according to the story for Life of Pi, which was an amazing breakthrough at that time. Did you ever think you'd be in creating digital actors? What do you think is next? What did you learn on this project?
I learned that creating digital actors is really hard. It's, I don't think we were perfect. I think I'm happy that we've advanced it next for I think our success was only possible by all the steps that came before it, and we were standing on the shoulders of giants in that sense, and hopefully raise the bar for other people to pursue it further. I think in answer, what's next? It's hard to say. I mean, 20 years ago, I don't think I could have described what we're doing. I do know there's some exciting work on what's called real-time rendering. The game engines have been making imagery that's getting closer and closer to reality, so perhaps there'll be a time when there's certain types of effects that can be done on set. So a person is in front of a blue screen, the computer is generating the background on the fly, and you walk off the set with a completed thing. I think that could allow different things to happen in a movie, like certain stories that may be that are adventurous, and these are expensive investments, and if you can do it at a cheaper price, perhaps you may be able to get more stories to camera that way. So that's something that can be done. And then apart from that, one of the things I will hope starts to happen is with visual effects. I know there's been a lot of excitement and everyone's jazzed to see what's the new technology, and it's kind of like at the beginning of the cinematography, that there would have been a lot of rapid advances in cameras and that. But at some point you settle into the point where you start to talk about what people are doing with the technology, and that tells the story. So same thing with visual effects. We're all artists. We're not just technicians, and we bring as much to the film as any other department, helping the director tell the story. So we have script advice. We suggest shots to help tell the story, and I think I'd love to see as much excitement on what the visual effects team has done with the tools at hand than necessarily just always talking about the tools themselves.
Well, it was obviously a major advance for this industry. It's got a lot of people talking. So I enjoyed it, and I want to thank you, Bill, for taking time to chat with us about it.
Pleasure.
And that was another Studio Daily podcast from the front lines, my conversation with visual effects supervisor Bill Westenhofer about his VFX work on Ang Lee's new film Gemini Man. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch your inbox every month for more newsletters directing you to our monthly podcasts covering the art, science, and people involved in the world of feature filmmaking. I'm Michael Goldman. Have a great day.